Right, so let us start. Would like to look into the research methods. It's part of paper one. I think that's what mainly constitutes paper one. So as a matter of principle, I think I have to outline all the key areas that we're supposed to look into under this paper. We have it's AS level. Methods of research is part of the initial areas. Right. So it's after the topic of socialization, right? Yes. So we are going to look at you have to examine the different research methods and the types of data used in sociological research, exploring the strengths and limitations of which of these. You also have to look at the process of designing research and key ideas of assessing the value of different research methods. You also have to look into whether or not sociology can and should be based on the natural sciences. Remember, sociology came later on. A sociologist they developed it, they established and developed it later on due to the response of some social issues which were being faced in the societies. That's why it's referred to as a social science. Before we talk of studying sociology as a subject, we already had like natural sciences, subjects like physics, chemistry, and biology. They were already there, and they were already being studied as a full-blown subjects, right? Since we already had a record of studying those, right? When we introduced sociology, we ended up like employing some of the techniques that we use in those sciences. In the what? In sociology. That's why sociology is regarded as a social science. So it means we are using scientific methods to study the society. Right. So we are going to look at the types of data, the methods, and the research design, approaches to sociological researches, research issues again. So as of today, we are going to start on 2.1, which is types of data, methods, and research design. So there are about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 topics under this broader topics of types of data, methods, and research design, right? So as of today, we are specifically going to look at the difference between primary and secondary sources of data. And mainly, this lesson is on the quantitative and qualitative data. Yes, so I will try to explain that in detail. Quantitative and qualitative data. Right, so so when you talk about the research methods, research is the process whereby data is systematically gathered, analyzed, and interpreted in order to increase our understanding of a particular phenomenon. So sociologists obtain their knowledge of human behavior through research. So sociologists, for them to understand that this area has got a large number of robberies, or this area has a certain percentage of orphans and widows, they have to do a research. So that's what we are going to look into. So, which results in a body of information, which helps to move beyond guesswork and guesswork and common sense in understanding society. So as of today, we are specifically going to start with quantitative and qualitative research. So the word quantitative is from the word quantity. And here we will be dealing with numbers. Yes. So the sociological information will be represented with what? With the numerals or with the numbers, right? So quantitative research is generally a numerical approach to understanding human behavior. Like we'll be using figures or manamba to understand the. So it produces what we call quantitative data, which means the data or the information that is being provided will be in quantitative form, will be in numerical form. Like if we would say we would want to research about the percentage of people who are unemployed in Bari, then we say 67% of people are unemployed. That 67% is what we call the quantitative data. It is always given in numerical what? In numerical form. So it expresses information numerically and captures numerically. It means it gives information in numbers. So it captures the who, the what, the when, and the way of behavior in one or three ways. Like we can give our answers as raw numbers, e.g., total number of people living in a society. That's quantitative data. If we would say in Harare there are 1.2 million people, that's an example of quantitative data. So we can also give it in a percentage, like e.g. the number of people per 100, that's a percentage. Or the rate, that is the number of people per 1,000. That is if we'll be employing what? The population data statistics. Remember, population, we have birth rate, we have death rate. Those are expressed in numerical form. So quantitative methods include surveys. We'll look into that in detail. This lesson is mainly on quantitative and qualitative. Right. So there are surveys, there are structured interviews, there are observations, there are questionnaires. You know questionnaires like you write questions beforehand, then you'll be interviewing people in line with those questions. So there are questionnaires. We also have review of records, documents for numeric information. So we usually say when we're in sociology, this one is a deductive process used to test pre-specified concepts, constructs, and hypotheses that made up a theory. Right. So a hypothesis is just sort of an expression that is given, or a theory about something. You gather data, then you come up with a statement, for example, which says there are about 15,000 widows in Bari. That's a sort of an hypothesis or a theory. Then we need to dig into the veracity of that, whether or not it's true or not. So it is more objective. Like it provides observed effects of a program on a problem or condition, right? So it is less in depth. Why? That's where we use triangulation. Triangulation is whereby we say these methods help each other to retrieve the sociological information. Because if I would just tell you that there are 20,000 orphans, right, in Bari, that's just a figure that you've given me. I have to know further how were they orphaned, how are they living. That's where we employ what? Qualitative data. So that's another weakness of quantitative data, like it is less in depth, but more coverage of information across a large number of cases. So you can, it employs fixed response options, e.g. closed-ended questions, and statistical tests are used for analysis. Like when you have the statistics on a graph, right, you can use them to analyze. What am I saying? If we say 67% of people are unemployed, we analyze. Why are they unemployed? What is causing that unemployment? We even come up with a range of reasons, So it can be valid and reliable. It is largely dependent on the measurement device or instrument used. And more time used on planning, while less time is used during analysis of results. It's one of its weaknesses. It is more generalizable mainly because it is normally conducted using large numbers. So sometimes when we are dealing with large numbers, we end up generalizing or rounding up. And you get the same. Nzvimbo iyi ine vanhu 72,000. Tinogona kuti haine vanhu 70,000, it's generalizable. But the positivists, a group of sociologists which include top sociologists like Auguste Comte, argue that they prefer quantitative to qualitative research. So let us look into the strengths again, right? The ability to express relationships statistically can be useful if the researcher does not need to explore the reasons for people's behavior. So if they simply need to compare the numbers of murders committed each year in different societies, that's another strength. So it is used for comparative reasons. What am I saying? Let's say in a place, a police station records 50 thefts in a year, right? That is, let's say they record 50 thefts in 2023. Then in 2024, they record 25 thefts. That record keeping is wise. Why? Because the sociologists would also want to know why there was a drop. Why vakabata mbavha 50 in 2023, but in 2024 why vakabata mbavha like 23? Ziri lesser. Or why is there an increase? Sometimes, let's say, we might record 67 robberies in a certain year. Then the next year we record 200 robberies. So the importance here of quantitative data is we can use it to compare. Yes, we can use quantitative data to compare. That's number one. Number two, allows us to summarize vast sources of information and make comparisons across categories. Those are done. Yes, and quantitative research is more reliable because it is easier to replicate the study, and the standardized questions do not change. When we say it is easier to replicate the study, is you have a starting point, you can you can redo it. To replicate is to copy something. Yes, you can use the same ways that you did in researching that particular thing last time. Then quantitative data also makes it easier for the researcher to remain objective. Yes, you remain objective because we are dealing with the figures here. We are dealing with the numbers. So they don't need to have a closer personal involvement with the subject of the study. So their personal biases are less likely to intrude into the data collection process. Why am I saying so? Because it's so hard to manipulate figures at times. Figures are also the easiest thing to trace. Figures. Information like non-numerical information can be manipulated. But information in a number, you don't need something. Let's say they've stolen money. By interrogation, 2,000 next week, but 100. Like we compare the 2,000 that you once mentioned and the 100 that you've mentioned. So, so sometimes playing around with the figures, it's not. You won't get away with it. You won't get away with it if you try to trick people with the figures. Right? But however, it has some limitations. Quantitative data only captures a relatively narrow range of information. It captures like a narrow range of information, like it only captures the who, the what, the where, and the when of people's behavior. It's difficult to get the real meaning of an issue by looking at numbers, and that's true. Because if you just tell me that there are 15,000 single fathers in Budiriro, these are just numbers at times. They just don't review main information why they became single fathers. So issues are only measured if they are known prior to the beginning of the research. That is according to McLeod. Then there is what they call quantrophrenia. This is the quantification for its own sake. We call it quantrophrenia, the quantification for its own sake, regardless of whether it tells us anything useful about the behavior being qualified. And that's what most people do. Like they just give rough estimates. 20,000. It's quantification for its own sake. Quantification for the sake of quantifying. The information might not be accurate, So let us look at the qualitative research. So qualitative research involves interpretive, descriptive words rather than statistics number. So here we have already established the main difference between qualitative data and quantitative data. We have already established that difference between qualitative data and quantitative data. The difference here is quantitative data is in numerical form, whilst qualitative data is interpreted in words, right? So sometimes qualitative data can be used as an extension of the depth of quantitative data, like we are now using it to analyze underlying meanings and patterns of social relationships. So it gives quantitative data, it is data in the form of words. Let me repeat it again. Quantitative data is data in the form of what? Of numbers. Then qualitative data is data in the form of what? Of words. So qualitative methods focus groups, participant observations, content analysis, historical comparison, in-depth interviews, and reviews of documents for types of themes. So it deals with the data which aims to get personal views and opinions across. It deals with the data to get personal views and opinions across. Like you can deal with these are now personal views. Let's say we've got the information that we have 15,000 single fathers, then we can do a random sampling. We can pick one single father at any market or at any mall. Then we can have sort of in-depth information of why he became a single father. Are you getting what I'm saying? Because if we just have a number, it is not adequate for us to convince us. Yes, we want to know the reason why you are unemployed. We want to know the reason why you are an orphan and the challenges that you are facing. So that's when we deal with in-depth interviews. The sociologist would interview that person so that we can get in-depth information. So it looks into things in depth, and quality is more important than quantity. That's what they say. So primarily inductive process is used to formulate theory or hypothesis. So it is also more subjective. It describes a problem or condition from the point of view of those experiencing it. That's where you get the in-depth information, the real reason why we are facing a certain issue. So data that represent nominal scales such as gender, socio-economic status, and religious preferences are usually considered to be what? Qualitative data. Because some of these informations are insensitive information. Why you question information? Insensitive. Why do you do this? Like I've seen some people interviewing those sex workers. Yes, as a sociologist, you have to understand the predicament of that. Because in sociology, we blame the society, you know that. Yes, I think you have heard about Emily Decky explaining about suicide. So society, as sociologists, we don't do that. Sociologists and psychologists, we empathize with the people. We get into their own shoes and try to understand why is it like that. Because we blame everything to social what? Social forces. Social problems, social solutions. So if someone commits suicide, we don't blame that person. We blame the society for neglecting that person. That's why even if you go to a prison, I once went to Chukurumi Maximum, they even employ social workers and sociologists. Those people, they are part of what they call the rehabilitation program. They are trying to understand your situation. Why did you commit these heinous crimes? Even if you are a rapist or a murderer, the prison is a place which is welcoming to those people in one way or the other. They try to assist those people. Yes. Because it's not always, of course, there's personal responsibility. Yes, if you would kill someone, you face the personal consequences of that, right? But sometimes magistrates and those who work in the prison system also come with this angle of justice. They also want to understand why you committed that crime. That's why you find out that even if you would steal, the magistrate in court would ask you why you stole. That's not a simple question. We're not talking about easy, but they just want to understand your personal circumstances so that it can also help them to shape their judgment. Kuti nini ndakazobama zaima okay, because handisikuenda kubasa vana vangu vasina chekudya. So kana ari magistrate anenge anzwa tsitsi anenge understand anobva akupa uone kuti next time aiwa vasikana ngatinotsvairai nekunopusha ngoro tiwane mari kwete kungotozotora zvinhu mahara. Anoconsider that as consideration. So they understand that sometimes when we ask kushanda because of A, B, and C. That's sociologist for you. I'm trying to say that we want to identify problems in the society and also try to pin them to to the social problems that we might be facing. That's why we get in-depth information. I was trying to give an example of the prostitutes. Those they call them Thai vendors under H Metro, like Vaskana Nutengesa. I've heard some interviews. So generally, the society will condemn. Something like that. But as sociologists, we try to know the reason why it reached that stage. Why would the person engage in what? In sex work or in prostitution? Like maybe it's because he was desperate. Because there are some desperate life situations. I've lived in poverty for almost the rest of my life and I understand that. Like poverty might send you to do something that you never imagined that you could do. And most people who could hear this understand what I'm saying. Yes, they can do something secretly because of poverty. So some of those girls, because of some social issues like lack of opportunity, like they were orphaned at young ages, lack of support from relatives, they will be so desperate to an extent that they would say, okay, let me just engage in prostitution. So that's when sociologists come on with the support system. We don't judge people as sociologists. We understand problems from a sociological perspective. When someone commits suicide, we blame the society. When someone is unemployed, we blame the society. When someone is an uncovered orphan without any support from anyone, we blame the society for neglecting that person. When someone breaks into people's houses, we also blame the society. As sociologists, we don't blame that person. Everything is linked to what? To the society. Right, so, right. So, it makes use of unstructured or semi-structured response options. When you say unstructured or semi-structured response options, it's because when you are engaging or if you want to acquire qualitative information, you can use interviews. So that interview might be structured and then unstructured. When I say structured, you might have some questions that are already lined up. But you know, when you are having a conversation with someone, you might also have that edge of asking something which is not on the script. And alright. History makaita chi ubva takaita French Revolution, right? question, I would have written that, what did you do in history so far, right? Then you say, that's the question that I have. Then you can say we did the French Revolution, right? My next question is not structured, it's semi-structured. It is coming because of the context. Then smells your pass. That's like unstructured or semi. Don't go over that will extend of it. Not all right. Sagamakato it National Assembly, Legislative Assembly. There's a little question, so it might be both. You know, you are asking someone, right? There are some questions you would have planned to ask. Then there are some questions which are unplanned. So there are no statistical tests that are used for analysis. The data cannot be easily turned into a list of numbers or a graph, right? Yes, because a graph deals with what? With numbers. So it's sort of a limitation. Yes, because the data cannot be used on graph. Graph cannot deal with figures. So methods of analyzing qualitative data include thematic analysis and also what they call content analysis, right? So moving on to its strengths, it can be valid or reliable. It largely depends on the skill and rigor of the researcher. Yes. When you talk about skill and rigor of the researcher has to be headstrong, you know. Like you have to be a very strong and excellent researcher so that you can get information. I love this journalist called Trevor McDonald's. He's in America. Anofamba ma prisons, ma high security prisons. Epane interview yakandofara ndogaranchiwa na Indiana State Prison. Yanga akanopinda munonzi ku death row. Ku death row kwakutono 12 guys who were like bound to be hanged. He was so friendly, like that guy. I think he has a sociology background. He was not even judgmental of the situation. He asks in a way, you know, but if you face such a guy, he asks you in a friendly manner to an extent that you divulge all the information, and in a comfortable and friendly manner. You know, he asks you about your girlfriend, he asks you about your family, he asks you about things which make the person friendly. You know, sometimes when you're in prison, you won't have much time or an opportunity to express some of the things in your life. So he asks you in a way that it's refreshing. You know, he asks everything. Why are you keeping a cat in your cell? You know, he asks very pertinent and like good questions, you know. Even to murderers, there are some people when death row. I've seen this other guy who killed 2 police officers. I think he was hanged last time because they still have the death sentence in some states in America. So he interviewed some of those people. So it gives a detailed picture of what people do, think, and feel. It's valid, yes, because you'll be asking, and the people will be answering question. It is subjective because it involves opinions, meanings, and interpretations. And they are what we call interpretivists, right? They prefer qualitative data because they say it is richer or it is more advantageous than quantitative data. Yes. And it allows the researcher to capture the complex reasons for behavior. We want to understand something. Because a problem is not what it seems on the surface. A problem is not what it seems on the surface. When you see a problem, let's say you see someone who is homeless, it's not as easy as you think it is. You know, there are some complex issues, or there are some complex matters which made that person homeless, right? So this method also has some limitations. Quantitative research focuses on the intensive study of relatively small groups, which may limit the opportunity for applying the data more widely. Such data may not be representative because it is time consuming. Let's say we want to research about those sex workers. There is no way you can spend the whole week asking about like interviewing each and every prostitute, each and every sex worker. You choose one, right? Yes. Yes, I've watched some documentaries on crime in South Africa. Some of the interviewers would just engage, like there would be plenty of gangs in an area. So you would engage one gang member. So that one gang member, of course, it's disadvantageous because it doesn't give us the whole picture. But that one gang member can help us to have the information of the whole systems and how they operate. Of which is a limitation one way or the other, because we'll be dealing with just one person. So it is also difficult to compare qualitative data across time and location, because no two groups will ever be qualitatively the same. And again, it is easy to replicate. It is hard to replicate, sorry. Yes, but sometimes people give some responses in an interview according to their mood. Unogona kuya undibvunza zvepersonal life yangu this week. Ndechitofara, life yangu tori bore inini zviro ndazodai kwamachwene ndikazofara. Next week ndisina understand. Sometimes mari inogona kukontrola mood yemunhu. So munhu waunobvunza nhasi, if you ask someone some information, it might not be the same information they would give you after 2 weeks. So it's hard to replicate. It's ever changing, and people are not always consistent. And sometimes their life changes. Yes. Because even the level of thinking. How I reasoned when I'm 31 years now. How I reasoned when I was 25. And how, and how I'm reasoning now, sorry. And how I'm reasoning now, they're totally different. And you also see how I will reason after 5 years or after 10 years. It's totally different from how I'm reasoning now. So the depth and detail of the data also makes such research difficult to replicate, which means its reliability is generally lower than that of quantitative research. Right, so that's it for this one. I think we are done for today. 6. Right, so we'll look into the next area in the next lesson.